Well, that's the son-devouring father. That's a painting by Medina of Satan. It's a pretty horrifying one. And that's Captain Hook. I really like the figure of Captain Hook. Some of these popular mythological stories, myth-based fairy tales, modern fairy tales, have got things really right. Captain Hook, well, he's a pirate. So, I think I told you that in the Google engineers' investigations of female sexual fantasies, the pirate played a large role. Werewolf, vampire, pirate, surgeon, billionaire. Incredibly comical. Well, pirate, you know, captain of the high seas and someone willing to break rules. There's a romance in that figure. Well, so the idea of the great father as the pirate is a good one. Well, Hook is kind of a pathetic pirate, and of course pirates are precisely that, because they're also crooked. And so what makes him pathetic? Well, it isn't because he's got a hook precisely, because maybe that's just a sign of adventure. It's because he's being chased by a crocodile with a clock in its stomach. Well, that's the dragon of chaos, right? That's time, tick, tick, tick. Your life is going to end. It's already got a piece of you, and it's coming for the rest. And so Hook is terrified of that. He's terrified into resentment and evil, roughly speaking. It's why he can prey on other people. And so that's the father in the Peter Pan story, out in Neverland, which is the archetypal domain. Captain Hook's the father. Well, why would Peter Pan want to grow up to be Captain Hook? Well, he doesn't. And so he stays Pan. Pan means everything, right? Like pantheism. He stays everything. He's this divine child. He never wants to grow up. Well, why would you sacrifice the potential of youth to become nothing but a death-obsessed tyrant? Well, that's the story in Peter Pan. And of course, Wendy's in this story, and so is Tinkerbell. Tinkerbell is the imagined feminine. She doesn't even exist. She's just this perfect little thing that's always around whenever Peter Pan needs her. But the problem with Tinkerbell is that she's a fairy and fairies don't exist. He has Wendy there. She's a real girl. She grows up and actually marries someone. Peter Pan stays king of the Lost Boys forever. And you know, maybe it's better to be king of the Lost Boys than not to be king at all, but maybe not too. King of the damned is not exactly something to, it's not a dominance hierarchy to strive for dominating. So that's the Peter Pan story. And it's the right story for the modern age, that's for sure. So that's a negative element of the Great Father. There's a positive element of the Great Father. These are both, this is a representation of Moses receiving the rules for living from God on high. Well, we talked about that already, you know. And I see that, that's a story of the revelation of structure. And that's the story of mankind. We're acting out a moral structure. Well, what is it? Now and then we get a glimpse of what the moral structure is, and it hits people with the force of a revelation. Then it can be articulated, and that's partly what the story of Moses lays out. And you see here, this picture, I really like this one too. This is a supplicant, basically someone who's hit hard by a divine vision. It's God in heaven. Again, very, very similar to this, with the cross in the background. And it's something like, to transcend your littleness, because look, he's looking up. That's what's at the top of the dominance hierarchy. It's what's at the top of all possible dominance hierarchies. Look up. That's the father who supports the son that's transcending his own vulnerability, right? Willing to bear it voluntarily and not to shirk from that. It's exactly right. And it is what you admire in people. You know, you admire people who are courageous and who are strong. And when you decompose that, it means that they're able to act appropriately and in a helpful, compassionate, wise, and tough manner, despite the fact that they're beset with all of the problems of mortality that beset everyone else. Well, how does it go wrong? Well, that's all propaganda for Hitler. And look at the imagery, you know. He's a knight, that's on the right. He's the knight of nationalism. Well, that's God the Father too, you know. It's a little bit one-sided, right? Because there's more to the Father than the state. That's the thing, and that's the problem with nationalism and its totalitarian variants. And we're moving in that direction fast, right? You see Europe right now fragmenting again because the European Union is too amorphous and maybe not well enough bordered. And everyone is getting nervous and they're saying, back to the state, back to the state. It's fair enough, fair enough. You need to be around people who are like you, so to speak, that you have built a consensus with. but to subordinate yourself to the state and to make its head the bearer of the archetype of the knight without having that element of individuality in it is absolutely pathological. We've already been down that road, right? Because the National Socialists were hyper-national, just like, well, both in Germany and in Italy. And it's attractive again. It's interesting here, you see Hitler as a knight, and up here there's a bird, you know, and that bird should be the dove, because that should be the Holy Ghost if the iconography was proper, but it's not, it's an eagle. And an eagle is a bird of carrion eater, right? It feeds on corpses. Well, it's worth thinking about. So that's the woman worshipping the strong father, another representation of Hitler as a knight. And then there's Hitler as wise father. You see, he's surrounded by people there who focused in on him as if he's of archetypal import. And then this is a poster from the Allies, an anti-Nazi poster from the Allies. And you see right there that Hitler and the Nazis are assimilated to a mess of predatory snakes. It's like, well, why? Well, if you want to appeal to someone's determination to destroy, you say, well, here you are and you're all ready to go. Let's go kill some snakes. And everyone can say yes. And then you say, well, there's the snakes right there. And the thing is, it's true to some degree, because you have plenty of snakes just like everyone else. And so it's easy. That's the first step towards demonization. And you can do it just like that. It's no problem. The archetype will map perfectly, especially if there's already tension between the groups, or if the other group is identifiable in some manner, or you can make it identifiable. Disgust is the best way to do that. Not fear. Disgust. Fear. To fear someone, you have to respect them. You don't want to burn everything that the person that you fear owns. You want to burn everything that the person who disgusts you owns. And so you'll see people who are pushing the nationalist agenda hard, and Hitler did this beautifully. Everything that was outside of the Aryan domain of purity wasn't to be feared. It was disgusting. It was contemptuous. And it should be destroyed and purified by fire. And that was his message. The Nazis were unbelievably great at using fire of purification as a symbolic message. Well, it has an archetypal power. And then you see here, this is an English poster from the World War II, asking people to buy bonds to fund the American or the British war effort. And you see these talon-like claws, Japan and Nazi Germany, reaching out to the Virgin Mother and her infant child, right? Deep subordination of archetypal imagery for the purposes, well, I hesitate to say propaganda, because World War II in some sense was pretty clear cut, but you get the point. And there's the uniformity of the state, right? So the goose step, everybody moves exactly the same way. Everybody's turned into exactly the same carbon copy of everyone else. All the diversity is pushed out of the state. It's subordinated to the supreme leader, and the hierarchy becomes incredibly rigid and homogeneous. It's like, well, that's great for fast action, but it's terrible if you don't know where you're going. You need some diversity. You need some flaws in the crystalline structure in case you're on the wrong path. And that's why you can't have everyone being the supreme leader's acolytes. The whole bloody thing wanders off in one direction. And because we don't know the right direction to go, wandering off in a single direction is extraordinarily dangerous. You will eventually fall over a cliff. So there's the Nazis' use of light at night. They were unbelievably good at their this is one of the things that made fascism so difficult to fight, because with communism, because it was a fully articulated philosophy, you could attack it rationally. But fascism never really did that. What they did instead was use ritual, right? Huge mass rallies and highly emotionally supercharged meetings, and then the use of light and fire. And so Hitler built the biggest parade grounds in human history to host the Nuremberg rallies, and he would get in front of them on this huge stage with Greek columns, very impressive looking, and have blocks of thousands of people organized perfectly, orderly. The Germans are good at order, and order is associated with disgust sensitivity. Incredibly organized, orderly displays, complete, and then at night with fire. And behind him he would have all of the searchlights from the Luftwaffe lined up, dozens of them, shooting their lights straight up miles into the sky. So we stand in front of these incredibly impressive displays of light long before there were rock shows and so forth doing that. You know, it was unparalleled in history, and address the crowd, and he was very good at addressing the crowd. He'd say something, and if people were listening, he'd say more of it, and if they were listening, he'd say more of it. And because he was addressing the mob got exactly from Hitler what they wanted, and we saw what that was like, right? 120 million people dead in no time flat, and the worst horrors that were ever perpetrated on people, maybe, because there's no shortage of perpetrated horrors.